In today's tutorial, we're going to take the meal plan functionality that we tested out in the previous tutorial and slap a user interface on it so that our users can create, view, edit, and delete all of their meal plans. The goal for this tutorial is to be able to display a meal plan primarily and be able to create a meal plan. In the previous tutorial, we added the ability to generate a meal plan, so it randomizes the meals that are going to be cooked in a given week and takes away that aspect of thinking from the user. And today we're going to put the user interface elements, the forms, the buttons, the links in place so that a user can actually go to that and see those from our Rails application. I'm kind of imagining the creation of the meal plan working in one way. So you go to a page that has a form, you have a start date and end date for a given meal plan, you submit that form, and then it will re-render the same page, giving you the options to tweak the dates if you want to, but it'll also come back with pre-populated meals for each of the dates that you have selected. The user should be able to customize the meals that are returned before they actually go and create the final meal plan. As for the viewing and the deleting and the editing, we saw all of this in the recipes CRUD episode from a few weeks back, and we're going to build out all of that stuff again, and it's going to be very similar. You're going to be shocked at how similar it is when you're just working with resources in Rails, at how most of the time it just kind of works, and it follows the very similar pattern. And even though these are two things that are characteristically different, in the end of the day, we're still taking some user input. We want to map it to an object in our system and then save that to a database record, and that works the same way regardless. So let's get started. We're going to create our routes as our first thing. So if we go to config, routes, we see here we need a resources, meal plans. From here we're going to go and create our controller for this. So we need a new file, and this is going to be the meal plans controller. Unlike the last time, we're going to put our before action here to require login so that only logged in users can access this. And then we're going to start by working on the new and the create actions first. Then we'll bounce back and look at the viewing of meal plans. And then finally, we'll wrap around and handle deleting and editing. So at first, we're going to work on this new one. And we need a meal plan to start. And so we'll take the current user, get his meal plans, and then we'll build a new one. And this one, we're going to set some predefined values on this. So it's going to have a start date. That's going to either be from a parameter of start date, or if that's not there, we'll take date.today. And we'll set an end date. Take the params of end date. Or we'll take 6 days from now. And then we want this to be a date object. 6 days from now actually gives you down to the exact moment in time. So this would give us the exact week to the exact hour to the exact minute from where I am right now. So that's not exactly what we want. And then before we actually let the view render itself, we need to take our meal plan and build the meals. So by default, if you go to the new meal plan view, you're going to see today is the start date, next week as the end date, and then it'll come pre-populated with some meals that are already there on the page. So what we're going to do now is we need to go and work on this view. Means we're going to need to add a new directory in here. This will be meal plans. And then inside of the meal plans directory, we need a new file for new.html.erb. I'm going to fly through and put the contents of this in here, and then we'll bounce back and talk about it. Okay, just looking at this top form, this is the first form that we're going to have that will allow you to select your end date and your start date. And this is a normal form builder, but we customize some things. So a meal plan by default, this is not saved. And if you remember back to when we first talked about form builders, if you pass in an object that's not saved, it will, by default, it'll post, and it will find the URL that it's going to use is going to be the meal, or it's going to be whatever the class is for this path. So in this case, it's meal plan. It would go to meal plan path with the method of post, which would hit our create action. That's not what we want. We want when you click the generate plan button for it to hit our new action and send the parameters of start date and end date. This way we can customize how we pre-build this meal plan and then rebuild the meals that are associated with it. So that's the big customization that we're doing here, is we're overwriting the URL and the method that this form uses. So URL, this corresponds to the action portion of the actual form tag, and then the methods there too. Down here, we render partial form, and this is so that when we go back to do the editing and the update portion here in a few minutes, that we just already have this done. We're extracting our form partial now. So let's create that next. So this is going to be _form.html.erb. You might notice that at this point we have multiple _form files, but based on the location of those files is what dictates when they're going to be rendered. So when we look at this render partial form, what Rails is going to do by default is it's going to look where we're at for a partial form, and then if it doesn't find that, it'll try looking in other places. The first thing that we want to do with our form is we want to render out potential errors that we might have. So if they're present, then we want to render these. This will be in a div of class errors. And with a unordered list, and with each error getting its own list item. Moving on to the actual form here, this is going to use form for MealPlan, just like the other one did, except for we're going to let it use the default URL and method, because that's actually what we want in this situation, because we are really creating a new MealPlan now. So we're going to take a couple of hidden fields. One of these is going to be the start date. This is going to be pre-populated whenever somebody submits the form that's up above, or if they just go to the page, it'll be today and next week. So we'll need the same thing for end date. Oops. And then from here, we'll start with the actual, the meals. So we'll have a div of class meals to hold on to these things just so we can style them later. And then inside of here, we're going to use something we've never seen before, and this is fields for meals. And then in here, we're going to say meal fields. First time you see this, it's a little bit weird, but what we're actually doing here is we're creating sub form builders, essentially. So remember that a meal is an actual model inside of our system, and a meal plan has many meals. So what this is going to do is that meal fields here is going to actually return us a form builder that's specific for each meal. And so what we can do from there is we can take each of these and add fields to our overall form. So mealfields.hiddenfield, we'll add the ID now, and that's going to be useful for when we edit, but it's not going to do anything just yet. And then we'll also add one for date, because this isn't going to be customizable by the user, because we generate these on specific dates based on how long the meal plan is. And then from there, we'll go on and continue with the actual data that the user can customize. So, oh, and I forgot, we're going to put a little heading here so that the user knows what date this is for. So we'll take the meal fields object. This will get you the actual meal that's behind it. And then we'll say date to s so that it'll render out in a way that makes sense to the user. Okay, and inside of here, what we're going to do is have meal fields, label, recipe ID, and then meal fields select recipe ID. And then this is going to take a few extra things. We're going to take current user and get the recipe options. This is a method that doesn't exist yet, and we're going to implement this in a second. We just need to make sure that all of our things match. So yeah, we have all the tags we need here, and we can come down here and actually create our submit portion. So div class actions, and then we'll let the form handle its own text here. So let's go to the user class and take a look at how we would do this recipe options thing. So if we go to models, user, we know we have many recipes, but we need a recipe options method. And then I'll just write this out here. What a select box in Rails form builders actually expects is an array that inside of it has arrays that include the display value and then what the backing value is for each element that is inside of there. So you would have option 1 and option 2, and this could have a backend value of like spam. So that's what we're going to do here. This is going to represent the recipe name, and this is going to represent the recipe ID. So we'll get rid of this. And the way we're going to do that is by saying recipes, and then we're going to use a function called map. And what map does is it enumerates over an array, and then it executes a block on each item inside the array, and then takes the return value of the block and uses that to build a new array that is returned. So in this case, for each item, we want to return a recipe name and the recipe's ID in an array. So where you have an array that has recipe 1, recipe 2, recipe 3, when you map this block on top of it, it's going to return an array of arrays that includes recipe name, recipe ID for each one of those things. So if we save that, we should be good to go. Before we get too far, let's go take a look at what our action looks like right now, just to make sure we're not completely off. Meal plans new is going to render that there are no meal plans for the current user. And that actually makes sense. We don't have meal plans on here yet. When we come back and refresh the page, we're getting another error here saying that there's undefined method date on nil class, and that's when we're calling meal fields objects. And what this means is that there is no meal here. The way that fields for meals is working is it requires the meal plan object to have an accepts nested attributes call on it, saying that the meal plan object is allowed to receive form attributes for a nested model. We never added those, so we need to do that now. If we go into MealPlan, this is another class method called accepts nested attributes for meals. When we refresh the page, you can see that it gives us our first form pre-populated with our dates. And since we made these of type date, it actually uses a date picker if you're in the browser that supports that. And then it returns a set here for each one of the meals that we have that populates it with a random recipe from the recipes that we created in one of our previous tutorials. Now the next thing that we need to do is actually create our create action. So let's do that now. Back in the meal plans controller, if we define create, what we need in here is to get our meal plan like we expect, which is going to be current user meal plans build with meal plan params. And then if meal plan save, else end, and then we'll work on this else first. We're going to populate errors so that it can be displayed, which is going to be meal plans, errors, full messages, and then we'll render new. For this top portion, what we're going to do is we're just going to redirect to the meal plan path for the meal plan with a notice of meal plan created. The big thing here, we need our meal plan params. So if we copy this, create a private method for it, it's going to be a little bit more complicated than the strong parameters we've worked with in the past. So we're going to have our params that require a meal plan, and we're going to permit things. But we're going to permit a little bit more than normal. So we expect a start date at some point. We expect an end date. And then we also expect meals, plural, attributes. And this means that since we're accepts nested attributes for meals, this is what is actually going to come through in our form when it's submitted. For each item in there, we can expect an ID, a date, and a recipe ID. So if we save that and we come back over to our form and we submit this, looks like we actually got an error because there is no meal plans. So let's get rid of that. Save it, try it again. When we resubmitted the form, it sent us back to the meal plans URL, but it still showed us this new. And that's because we went through the fail case in our create action, but it didn't actually show any errors. So that means that these errors must be nested a little bit deeper than we thought they were. We can take a look at this by adding a puts statement into our code here. So if we puts MealPlan errors, and then we call inspect on it so it doesn't just tell us that it's an errors object with the memory location. This should give us the hash representation. And then if we do this again, we should actually be able to see this in the logs. So if we create the MealPlan again, redirects us back, and then we can use docker compose logs f app to go through and read this. And this is our error right here. So looking through meals, meal plan must exist, meals, meal plan, error blank. Okay. And so what this is actually, this is a little bit weird to explain why it's doing this, but what's happening is when we're doing these accepts nested attributes, we're passing in all this data for the meal plan and then the meals subsequently, but the meal itself doesn't know how to hook up the meal plan association. And the way we fix that is actually by on both of these, we set the inverse of meal plan so that if meals are created on a meal plan, then when a meal created in this way calls the meal plan method on itself, it will hook back up to the parent. And then on the actual meal, we want to say inverse of meals, because this is how it's going to be called through the association. Now, if we come back and we do this again, it actually sends us to our show path so we know we're on the right track. Okay, the next thing we're going to move on to would obviously be the show, but we're going to clean up our form a little bit before we do that. And looking back in our form partial, we have this right here, this errors present errors. And this is the same logic we used inside of the recipes view. So if we go to recipes, form, you'll see the exact same thing here at the top. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to extract this out of both of them. So we can cut this, and here we're going to put a render partial shared errors. Save that. And then we're going to create a new directory inside of our views for shared partials. And this allows us to extract out things that are kind of universal, but they're not part of the layout. So in here, we can now have an underscore errors.html.erb, paste in just this bit, save it, and then go back to our meal plan form and call that render line again. And now, anytime we need to render errors from a form and we want to do it in the same way, we just need to use this one line instead of rewriting the same thing over and over again. And this works out really great for us because if we change our design on how we actually display errors normally, then we only have to change it in one spot and it'll cascade into the other parts of the application that use this. So let's close some of these files. And then now we can move on to our show view. So the first thing we need is our show action. And this is going to be def show with a meal plan that we pull from current user. It's pretty easy. And then our views, we're going to add a new one here. This is for show html.erb. And we want to do a few things here. So we're going to show our meal plan and then render out the meal plan itself. And then we will also show all the meals because that's really the important part of a meal plan are the meals. Okay, so now we have a date that we're showing and a link to the actual recipe. Then underneath this, what we can do is put our actions again. So these are all the buttons that we're going to use for manipulating the given object here. So we'll say div class actions. Going back over this, we render out each of the individual meals. Meals all have a date that they're represented. So it's on this date, we're going to eat this meal. And then in our actions bit, we just need to link to our edit and delete. Let's take a look at this and see how we did. Right. So this doesn't look too bad, except for the fact that we're printing out our meal plan and our recipes. And the reason for this is because as a programmer, this is the way we really want to represent this when we're rendering this out. We want to say meal plan, and down here we say link to meal recipe. This is just nice, right? So we can actually do this by overriding a method inside of our models that represents how it is printed. So for meal plan, we will do this by doing def to s. And then how we really want to represent this is as a string that contains the start date to the end date. If we save that, let's refresh. Oh, whoops. Star date. There we go. Okay. That's good enough. We can actually manipulate how we're going to represent dates later on. But just printing the date in a way that is somewhat readable is pretty good for us. And then inside of recipe, we will do the same thing. So if we define 2s on recipe, we actually just want it to return the name of the recipe. And there we go. It's much easier to see, oh, on the 14th, I'm supposed to be cooking that one right there. Or rather, the 15th, we do test edit as a thing. Now let's move on to our index view. Looking at our controller again, we need to define our index. But before we really dig into this, let's think about what the index for a meal plan is going to look like. You'll be able to see the meal plans that you have, but the only ones you are really going to care about are the ones that are in the future and the one from right now. So I think we should probably break this into two separate queries. So we'll find a current meal plan, which you take current user, get the meal plans, and then we're going to use a where clause, which lets us add in some SQL. You don't always have to use a string to do this kind of SQL, but in this particular case, we're doing something a little more complicated than you normally do. And we want to say that between, if it is today is the start date or it's after the start date, and the end date is greater than today, then we are good to show this as the current meal plan. And then we have to take the first one because it could return multiples. And now we'll get the rest of the meal plans. And we want to order these by start date and make that descending. And that's just so that we get to the ones that are the newest created ones first and then go back in time. So now we need to create our view for this, and meal plans views, new file, index.html.erb. For this top part, we're just going to show the meals that we have coming up. And we'll put in here that this is the current meal plan. So if we have meal plans, and then we also need to conditionally show this. So if current meal plan exists, because remember, it might not, you might not have one for that current date range. So if it does exist, then we'll show this. We also want to give them a little little heading to indicate that this is the current meal plan. Now from there, we can list out the rest of our meal plans. So we'll put a smaller subheading. And we'll list through these. Lastly, we need to create a place to store the buttons that we have, which is only going to be one, and this is going to be to create a new one. This is a new meal plan path. Let's save that and go take a look. Okay, looks like we messed something up in this string. Oh, it just says end, not end date. All right, so you can see that these are our current meals, and then these are our other meal plans. This could afford to be a little more separated, but that's okay. Not a whole lot left to build, but we need to work on our edit and update and our destroy. We're going to do our destroy first just because we don't have to even do any UI stuff for this. This will work similar to how our recipe destroy works. We grab the current one, call destroy on it, and then we redirect to the meal plans path with a notice. One thing to note here is that this is our first time deleting something that has a has many relationship to it, where meals only exist for the sake of being connected to a meal plan. And when we destroy this meal plan, it doesn't actually destroy the meal. So what we have to do is we have to go and change this association so that when you do destroy the parent, you actually destroy the children too. So if we go to our meal plan model and we come back to this, we'll say inverse of meal plan dependent destroy. So now if we come back over here and we take a look at this meal plan right here, and we delete it, it'll ask us, are you sure you want to delete the meal plan for these dates? Yes. Go off, and now we only have one meal plan, and it adjusted our current meal plan accordingly. Okay, the last thing we need to do is build our edit and update, and this shouldn't take very long at all. So remember that edit and update are very similar to new and show, except for, or new and create, except for edit does a find, very similar to show, which is fine. And then update is going to do something similar, except for it's going to use this find also. And then we're going to do something similar to this, except for instead of calling save, we're going to call update attributes with meal plan params. And then change our notice. The only thing view-wise we have to create for this is the edit view inside of meal plans. So if we go and create edit.html.arb and set this to be edit meal plan. And that's it. Let's go take this for a spin now. So if we click into our meal plan and we try to edit this, it's going to give us undefined partials is not a thing. It should be partial. So our form got a little bit messed up when we did that. Let's refresh the page. Okay, now you can see everything. Let's just change this to hammock something rather on the 14th. We're going to update our meal plan. And it worked, except for the fact that it put it down here. So we're pretty much good to go, except for it rearranged our the order of our meals based on how they were last edited. So let's go change that. And you can do this by taking a look at this right here. If the first thing you put after your association, this can be a lambda, which is basically, it's an anonymous function that you can use to set the order of things, or you can use it to change the query. So in this case, we want to order by date. Now if we refresh the page, it should be the same. And if we go and we change the 16th, well, whoops, that's not how you change that. If we go and we change what's on the 16th to be Artisan Pabst and change it, you'll see that we didn't rearrange anything. It just stayed right there. And that's it. We went through our entire CRUD workflow for meal plans. And now if you add recipes to the system, you can then generate yourself a random list of things to eat for a given week. And you can do that into the future and keep ahead of it. And you can edit, delete, all of these things. So I went through this a little bit faster than I have some of our other tutorials, even though it might have still taken a little bit. But that's because we've done a lot of this stuff before. So some of the things we learned in this one are how to work with has many associations better, especially with forms, using accepted nested attributes, which isn't something you should rely on too often. In this particular case, it just made sense. But maybe in a later tutorial, we'll cover form objects and how to create more complicated forms without mucking up your models. We also took a look at how we can change the way a model is rendered into the view using 2S, and how you can clean up some of your views by extracting partials for things that are shared between views but are not part of the layout. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you could like it and give it a share, that would be great. But I will see you next week as we dig into changing the UI of our system so that it doesn't look quite so plain.